everybody. Well, I'm not going to be able to outdo anyone who came up before me, and I'm just here to kind of tell you my story, and hopefully give a little bit of a lesson on empathy, or more or less take you through my journey on learning empathy. I was not always known as a super empathetic person. I still struggle with it, honestly. But it took an incredible journey for me to be able to figure this out, or an incredible moment in my life, and I want to share that moment with you. So as was mentioned, I've been a CTO. I've worked in technology for almost 20 years at this point, and it's sort of how I always identified myself. My last place, Noise, I was the CTO, but I was also part of a group there that was basically poised to make sure that the culture of a very small company that got much bigger very fast was retained. We called it the Culture Club. I think most of the people on it were too young to actually get the reference, but that's okay. And so the weird thing is, though, this whole time, I've actually been living another life. I'm actually a double agent or something. For the last 13 years, I've also run a nonprofit organization in my copious free time, as you have as a CTO. And this organization deals with animal cruelty. And so I want to take you back in time a little bit. In 2001, my neighbor's cat, a very good friend of mine and neighbor, her cat was stolen from the property and was set on fire with a Molotov cocktail. Obviously, this was devastating. You never think that something like this could possibly happen to you or anyone that you care about. She completely fell apart. It was a really long, really frustrating investigation. I think I was in my early to mid-20s there, and I pissed off just about every law enforcement agency in all of San Diego County, because what was happening was I had animal control, humane law enforcement, sheriff's department, and I think one other department not sharing information, and it made me completely bananas. And so basically every time I would get information, I would send out an Excel spreadsheet to all of these groups. I'm like, okay, now you can't tell me that you don't know anymore. You got it. And I really immersed myself in this cause. I was so angry and I felt so betrayed that I actually canvassed the neighborhood. We had a suspect. We basically knew who did it. We didn't have any evidence in order to convict him. But I actually went out and canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on his friends' doors, tried to get as much information as I could. Anyway, long story short, as this was happening, we were trying to figure out, I'm looking online. That's where I live. I'm online. I live in the internet. And I realized that there wasn't a ton of information for people in this position. There weren't at least kind of support groups for people who find themselves in this situation. I had done a fundraiser as well for the medical bills. Bert was the name of the cat. Her medical bills topped out over $6,000, and she died after 3 days in the veterinary emergency care. It's a really uplifting story, I know. It gets better, I promise. But so I realized that there's nothing there online. I'm like, okay, well, I do websites. I'm going to put some stuff online. Just kind of information, how do you help get cases prosecuted, blah, 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 blah. Basically translated all of my experience in this case into a website for other people. And then I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be really awesome? Because I started to speak to adoption shelters and rescues and things like that about this stuff, and they were really excited. And I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be really wouldn't it be really useful if these small shelters and adoption agencies could pre-screen, because most of them can't afford to do a full background check on people who are adopting. So wouldn't this be a useful resource? If only I knew a really good programmer. Okay, so suddenly I find myself writing a lot of code, and I built an administration system around this idea of, basically, I built a system where any agency could, if they wanted to, sign up with us and start using my case management system to put this stuff into a national database. And the cool part about this, since this was a long time ago, it was an opportunity for me to really experiment with some crazy new technologies like Google Maps. That was the thing. This is back in the days of MapQuest. So like that, literally their beta API, it was one of those things I pulled in geolocation. And so suddenly, as I start to speak at conferences about this stuff, I start to talk to animal control officers, and they're like, you have no idea how helpful this will be to me, because I can't prove to anyone that this stuff is actually a problem. You've got animal control officers who are buying their own catch poles, literally, because there's just no money. And so I start to kind of realize the other areas where this can be really amazing. I actually had a WAP version of the site. For those of you old enough to remember what WAP is, that I had that so that animal control officers could check the database while they were out on a call. And so throughout this whole thing, I was able to, and it sounds like the story ends there, like I turned this really painful moment into something really powerful and a really great resource and blah, 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 blah. It's actually not the end of the story. It's only the beginning. I don't know if you guys know who Jane Goodall is. Show of hands? Excellent. Do you guys know who Dian Fossey is? Okay, fewer hands, it's okay. As you guys know, Jane Fossey worked in Africa in the 1960s and on, doing a ton of research in the Gombe on chimps. And she basically completely changed the way that we perceived animals. The fact that they had individual personalities, the fact that they used tools, it actually kind of made us redefine the line between people and animals. So, you know, that's pretty cool. Dian Fossey was also in Africa at the time. She was in Rwanda and she was studying silverback gorillas. If you ever saw the movie Gorillas in the Mist, that movie was about her. And to put it lightly, from what I understand and by all accounts, her portrayal in that movie was actually a very kind version of how she did business. And I say this with absolute respect. The both of them were amazing women. Jane is still alive. They were amazing women that completely redefined the way that we looked at empathy in animals as well. And so like they did incredible work, really, really incredible work. And so I got a chance to meet Jane because of my organization a bunch of years ago. And somebody asked her in the audience, well, you were working in Africa at the time. You know, you must have known Dian Fossey. What do you think about her tactics? And for those of you guys who don't know about her tactics, let me explain the difference here. So basically, Jane Goodall, as she's working on these reservations, she was fighting poachers, of course, because that was a really big problem. And so what she would do is instead of shooting the poachers, she would hire them because she realized poachers don't hate animals. Poachers are trying to feed their kids. And so if you give them an alternate way to feed their kids, hey, suddenly I have fewer poachers and more chimpanzees. So that's great. Dian Fossey, on the other hand, would actually kidnap the children of the poachers. She would torture them. And she was really kind of renowned for being really, really difficult to work with by her own team. It was sort of alluded to in the movie Gorillas in the Mist that poachers had killed her. Honestly, nobody knows. But further evidence shows that it may have actually been people on her own staff because that's how difficult to work with she was. Both of these women were incredibly passionate, and did amazing things. They literally changed the face of our relationship with primates. But when somebody asked that question of Jane in the audience, when somebody asked that question, I thought to myself, you know, she had a really great diplomatic answer because she always does. She has just this amazing vision of grace and calmness. But I kind of, in my head, I thought, well, you know, one of them's alive and the other one isn't. And that seems like a kind of a crappy simplification. But really, I thought about that, and then I went to have lunch with my sister, and I was still really shaken by that question. And I realized, I was looking back at my own organization, my nonprofit organization that had basically been born out of anger and frustration. And I thought to myself, am I Dian Fossey or am I Jane Goodall here? And I realized I was actually a lot more Dian Fossey than I was Jane Goodall. And it was a really incredible moment. I remember that moment. I remember what cafe I was in Colorado. Like, it was just, and this was a million years ago. But it was one of those moments that completely redefined my relationship with my organization and actually the goals. Because before, this nonprofit organization basically collected the information, the personal information on people convicted of animal cruelty. And for me, it was cut and dry. You hurt an animal, you are a bad person, and that is the end of the story. And there was no other story to hear. And for me, it was that simple back then because I was so angry. And this was my way of getting justice because there was no other way that I could get justice. And then in that moment, as I'm thinking about, am I Dian Fossey or am I Jane Goodall, I realized, you know, I need to change the way that things are not so black and white. You know, I still need to have empathy for those people in my database too. They're still human beings, and when they get out of jail, they're gonna need to feed their kids, and they have families, and there are extenuating circumstances. You don't know everyone's story. And it was incredibly powerful and incredibly moving experience. So the reason why I'm kind of telling this long roundabout story is because one of the things that I've really come to believe is that there is almost no problem in the world that empathy can't help you with. Literally not a single problem in the world that a little bit of empathy can't help with. And it was, as I said, it's hard for me. I'm kind of a hard ass. I am, and I've got a reputation for being a hard ass. But it's something I work on every single day because I realize the value of it. I realize how easy it is to not realize that you're Diane Fossey and not Jane Goodall. And again, tons of props to Diane Fossey. She was badass at a time when women were not doing this. There were 2 of them in Africa, and they were changing the world. But it was really important to me, and I'm so glad that it happened sooner rather than later, that I had this discussion with myself. And so every time, whether I'm managing at work, whatever relationship I'm having, anytime I start to get angry or I start to judge somebody, they're driving too slow in front of me or whatever, my own anger management has gotten so much better since I've embraced empathy because suddenly, that guy driving in front of me is not actually just an asshole. There's something else going on in his life that makes him human. And I think given kind of the ties that bind us all here today, I think that actually, nobody can understand that more than we can, whether you're running a nonprofit, whether you're an entrepreneur. I think everybody in this room is really invested in doing a lot of social good and using their power and using their influence and their brains to help people who are not there yet, or to help people who would not otherwise have had opportunities. And so that power of empathy, to me, is one of those incredibly profound moments. And I love telling the story. Eventually, I will write it up and publish it in Inc. magazine or something because I love telling the story because it really, literally changed my life. One question changed my life. And that's me. Peace out.